Hi everyone, this is Amanda from the Quilting Bee in Massillon, Ohio. And I had a thought last night as I was drifting off to sleep. You know, we recently did a tutorial on making a mug mat. And the mug mat tutorial we posted has you attach binding, which is all well and good if you've got scrap binding or you feel like going through that effort. But sometimes we don't want to deal with binding. So my thought last night was I need to do a second tutorial to show you a quilt as you go and not have to deal with the binding. You also don't have to deal with the basting spray. So this is going to be a mug mat version 2.0 kind of walkthrough. Still quilt as you go, but just showing you a slightly different method. If you've ever been in the shop or if you're a new quilter, a lot of times we'll have our new quilters start by making placemats. So I'll put a link to our placemat tutorial down below in the first comment, but we call it the placemat method when we turn a project inside out. So you create your sandwich a little bit differently, but it enables you to not have to finish your project with binding, and you're kind of creating a fake binding border. So that's what this tutorial is going to do. I'm using this Feathered Friends fabric that we have in the shop. I just love this stuff. As well as a mix of Moda's Pansies and Posies. It's Pansies and Posies or Posies and Pansies. Either way, super pretty. Pretty little lavenders and teals in here. So again, I'm using scraps. It's a mug mat. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're not sweating over details. This is, in the end, it's still a mug mat. So this is another great scrap buster. I have some extra pieces from jelly rolls that I keep in this box. So if I didn't have these scraps left over from another project, I would be digging into my jelly roll scraps, because really having just 2.5-inch pieces is your best friend. But anyways, you use what you've got, what you want to use. You do you, that's what we like to say. So let's get started. As far as materials that you need for this, I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. I told you in the earlier video that you can make a mug mat any size you want. So I'm going to drive that point home, and today I'm starting with an 8-inch square piece of batting. So I've cut my piece of backing to be that same size. We're not going to use this yet though, so I'm going to put this aside. And then I have various strips of excess fabric from my last project. Most of them are longer than the square. And in fact, I might even get a little cute. I might find some slightly longer strips because I think I want to do this diagonally. So I'm going to find some longer strips of this. But I also have some smaller strips that I think will work well in my corners, so I can see my birds. So I'm going to be doing a quilt as you go diagonally across my square. So you want to think about which way do you want to do it. You can definitely replicate what we did before and maybe just do a few vertical and then a horizontal. You can start the log cabin and just go around. Do whatever you like. I'm going to collect my scraps and meet you over at the sewing machine. Now, if you're going to start on the diagonal like I am, you want to make sure when you lay your first piece down that you are more than covering that corner. So you can see I'm right there at the tip, so I'm going to pull this down just a little bit more. But you want an overlap from edge to edge, because we're going to start stitching what I would say is off the mug rug, so that when we go to trim the block, we're just going to trim all of those extra threads off so we don't have to do it as we go. So I'm going to just stitch a 1/4-inch seam right along this top edge. So I might lose a little of his head, but I have him stitched on. So I'm now going to quilt, if you will, add another stitch line or two because this is at the corner. You decide to use some of your decorative stitches on your mug rug. In the essence of time, I'm not going to, but you can always do that. If you do, you just want to make sure the foot you have on your machine is going to work well with those decorative stitches. Some feet are meant for just straight stitching, and if you try to change it to a decorative stitch, you're going to break a needle. So just check your manual before you do that. So for now, to keep it simple, I'm just going to do a couple rows of straight stitching down this. And so there you have it. I have my first piece just quilted on. Don't worry about those extra threads. You can see because it's a variegated pink, it goes light to dark. So then you're just going to take your next piece. Now recall, I cut a few more of my longer pieces because I need them more in my middle to make it from corner to corner. So I'm not going to use those right now. I'm going to use this pretty lavender piece. And I'm going to overlap it. So again, you just want to make sure after you stitch it on that it's going to go over each edge, extend beyond each edge, and I'm just going to attach that. I give this a nice finger press. I've got a bit of excess, I can tell that because as I come to this edge, I don't need all this, so I'm just going to give it a quick trim. And then give this a couple lines of quilting. I think I'm going to pull maybe this long green piece. That'll be a nice accompaniment. So again, I'm just putting it right sides together, making sure I'm going to have more than enough because I'm doing this at an angle to cover these points, okay? Giving that a good finger press. I'm covering both corners, which is what I wanted. I'm going to trim. I have a little bit of excess here. I'm just going to trim to that point so that I've got still enough to cover it. And go ahead and keep quilting. And my next piece I think will be, see if this is long enough. I think I'm going to use this pretty Pansies and Posies piece. And again, making sure I've got a long enough piece to keep working my way to the right and cover that batting. So I want to use my birds again. So I'm going to go ahead, lay this on here right sides together. Again, I'm making sure, and this is going to be close, I am making sure that my fabric is going to cover my batting. So I'm coming off a little bit here and a little bit there. So this piece should work. 1/4 inch seam. Give that a nice finger press. Ooh, I got lucky. Look at that. I am covering that edge so I can end here. So I'm going to give this a couple quilting lines. I want to take this right to the point just to make sure I've got that stitch down. It'll just make it easier when we go to turn everything out. So right now we have a pretty wonky looking piece. We've got threads everywhere, but it's quilted to that batting. So now we're going to trim this up. So I'm actually going to turn it over and use my piece of batting as my guide. So let's trim this up real quick. So now you have a mug mat done diagonally with just a few stitch lines. Looks great. I even like my variegated pink thread on this. So now it's time to make our placemat sandwich, if you will. So normally, if you recall, if you were making a quilt or a regular mug mat like we did in the other video, you would have your backing face down, your piece of batting, and your quilt top. But when you placemat it, we're saving ourselves the effort of binding. So we're actually going to place our mug mat face up with our finished fabric on top and take our piece of backing and lay it right sides together or two pieces together. And, you know, when you quilt as you go, when you quilt anything really, that batting, everything starts to shrink because you're bringing everything together. So I always like to just flip everything upside down since everything shrinks a little bit, and just make sure everything's going to be happy. And if I need to do a little trimming, I'll do the trimming. You can see I'm a little bit off here, just because as you go to stitch around, when we go back to the machine, it's easier because you know exactly where your batting starts and ends in relationship to your backing. So I'm just going to trim this up. So now when I take it to the machine, I know my backing fits the front of my mug mat perfectly. Now, what you want to make sure you do, I do this when I do my placemats, I definitely do it whenever I have to do the turn method. We're going to be leaving a hole for us to turn our project through. And you only need about a 2-inch hole. I like to mark it because otherwise I'll just stitch all the way around and forget that I'm supposed to be turning this inside out. It has happened more oftentimes than not, hence I'm pinning. So what I'm going to do is take it to the machine, and starting to the left of my turn hole here, back stitch, and I'm going to stitch a 1/4 inch seam all the way around to this last end point, back stitching here, leaving this open. So again, I'm putting my needle down below that starting point, and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam. You also might want to just make sure you aren't starting on your pin, because that'll break your needle. So I pull it down a little bit, and you just want to make sure you're really getting all 3 layers, that you're getting to that batting. Back tack. And then when you are a 1/4 inch from that corner, one more, leave your needle down, just lift your presser foot, and you can rotate the mug mat. No need to stop and end at every corner, just leave that needle down. So I'm at my last turn. I'm making my turn. I'm marking where my other pin was, just here with my finger, so I don't accidentally stitch over it. So I'm just going to take it down a bit and stop and back tack. And back to the table we go. So we have stitched all the way around, leaving our little turn hole here. Now, before we turn it inside out, I like to turn it over and just make sure I got through to that layer of batting, because there's been more than one instance where Mom and I have been making placemats and somehow you miss a layer, and next thing you know, you have a hole. Before you turn this inside out, you want to take scissors to your corners, and we're going to snip off the corners to the right of the stitch line. We aren't coming into this side. We're just trimming to the right of that corner. That's going to help everything just lay nicely. Some people will even snip that corner, and sometimes even snip a little bit off at each side, because it just helps it turn out nice and crisp. That's entirely up to you. I don't lose too much sleep over a mug mat. So once you've trimmed off your corners, you're going to find your turn hole again, and you want to make sure you're just separating your backing piece from what you've already quilted to the batting. Don't try to get cute and pull away from your batting. Remember, these 2 layers are already attached. And you're just going to gently start to push the mug mat through that hole that you left. You don't want to get too forceful with it, because you can tear the stitches, and why go back and have to restitch a mug mat? And you can use, sometimes your fingernail will work. If you've got a little corner turning tool, that will work. You just want to work your way through to each corner And you're just kind of pushing those corners out that we just squared off. So first I get everything turned right side out. And then, especially with my placemats, I don't want to lose too much sleep with a mug mat. I just take that tool. You don't want to use scissors or anything too sharp because you will just tear right through it. So you just want to gently try to push those corners out. Okay. So the next thing we do is we kind of roll the seam. Now, if you watch the placemat tutorial, you'll hear us say we actually pull it down and press that seam. What we want to make sure of is that our top is on top and the back stays at the back, because we're going to go back and stitch around this. So we don't want anything rolling back up. We don't want to see the backing on the top of our mug mat. So we just first go around and just, you can see I'm just sort of rolling those seams, pressing them down. And then we're actually going to take this over to the iron and give it a good hot press, because we also have to contend with this hole. Now, it's a mug mat. You could just go with it, stitch it closed, and not lose any sleep. However, I'm a little OCD. So I'm gonna grab a piece of my seam tape. This is Steam-A-Seam. And just take a little piece, you don't need a lot. And you can see our backing is already nicely folded. He already wants to become part of the seam allowance. So I just put a piece of this on that bottommost piece. You're going to take it to the iron, and as we press the rest of the project, you'll give that a nice press and peel that tape off, and then we can fold this in and it will just hold it nicely for us to stitch. So let's go to the iron. So here at the iron, again, you just want to give it a press. We're not ironing. So I'm going to press the rest of the mug mat first, just to, again, ensure I'm getting nice crisp edges. And then if you recall, my piece of Steam-A-Seam is right here. So I'm going to sort of lift this up and just give that tape. It's not going to stick to your iron. Just give that a quick press. So before you peel off that tape, go ahead and give your mug top, try to fold in that 1/4 inch seam first and give that a nice press. It will just make it easier once you peel the tape off to get everything to line up, because it's getting a little bulky. So once I've given that a quick press, I'm just going to peel off this tape. And again, this isn't going to be, it's not our permanent solution. It's just to hold everything in place. Give that a nice press. And then I'm going to take this back to the machine and give it about 1/8 of an inch seam all the way around that edge. And that's what's going to give us the illusion of binding. So again, I'm going to back tack. I think I'm going to start, just because I'm OCD, here in a darker corner because I am using the variegated thread. I'm not going to start right in the corner. I'm just going to come down a little bit into this bird's nest. And you're using 1/8 of an inch. I know we're all into that 1/4 inch mode, but you're just trying to, you want to make sure you can catch that seam that we just used the Steam-A-Seam on. That's why we're doing 1/8 of an inch. So just eyeball it, go slow, do the best you can to just try to stay nice and straight, making sure that your backing stays at the back and doesn't roll up to the front. So there you have it. That is a no binding placemat method, as Mom and I like to call it, way to do a mug rug. So again, you can make them square, you can make them rectangular, you do you. We always like to say that in the shop. You do you. You make your decisions. You make it however you want. You could do it vertically, so it was straight. I wanted to get cute, do it on my corners. Just have fun with it. It's a quick and easy way to blow through your scraps and make a sweet little gift for someone. I was on a Zoom call with my girlfriend this morning talking about this mug rug tutorial, and she said she's not a quilter. She said, I don't know what a mug rug is. I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I showed her the one I have up on my desk, which is a rectangular one. She said, why is it so long? Why are they so big? I don't understand. And I said, oh, the purpose of a mug rug is to hold your drink and your snack. So that's why we make mug rugs, because who doesn't want to have a little snack with their coffee or tea or water? So there you go. You do it however you so choose, but this is a great way to not have to deal with binding, which I think most of us appreciate not having to deal with binding. And you can still get a great little quilted mug rug. So that's all we have for today. Have a great one. See you next time. Thanks. So I thought I'd show you real quick. I've mentioned it a couple times, the log cabin method. You want to start with a center piece. I did fussy cut my bird in the nest. So you're just going to start with a center square as large or as small as you'd like. Stitch that on. So I have my square on. So then you're just going to choose your next piece of fabric. You do want your pieces to be cut straight unless you want your cabin to get a little wonky. And you just need that piece to be as long as whichever side you're going to sew it to. So I'm going to cut this extra off. So I need it to about there. And just attach this to one side, right sides together. Just using a 1/4 inch seam. Give that a good finger press. And then you're going to turn your piece and we're going to sew to the next side. So next piece, and I want to make sure I go around a couple times. So I'm using a piece that I know will leave some space here at the edge. But again, I'm just going to trim this to this edge. Give that a 1/4 inch seam. Finger press, again, turning the project, picking my next fabric, which maybe I'll use this sea glass. Right sides together. Realized I forgot to quilt, so I'm going to give this a quick stitch. I'm going to cheat. So I forgot to quilt as I go. So all I'm doing is starting at this last boob piece, and I'm just going to carry my needle to the middle of that green piece, turn it, and that's all you do is keep adding your strips, trimming your length. trimming your excess off at each end. That doesn't quite make it to the edge, so I think I'm going to trim this piece down a little bit just as it's sitting here trying to stay straight, so I can get one more piece to go around so it finishes off nicely. You also could have just trimmed it off there. Now, because this is going to be turned out, I am going to stitch a line right along the edge of that batting because we'll be turning this inside out, and I want to make sure this gets caught in that turn seam. Same on this side, I'll go down the middle. Again, I want to catch it right at the edge of that batting.